Oh, hello there! Before we start, I'd like to warn you that today's video will discuss some homophobic and psychophobic tropes. It's gonna be pretty mild, but I'd rather warn those of you for whom those might be sensitive topics. With that out of the way, today's video will focus on When Marnie Was There, an animated movie that came out in 2014 in Japan, with a bit of delay in the rest of the world. Made by a little-known Japanese animation studio, it was directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi. It's his second directorial credit, but the first time he's also credited for the screenplay. His first movie, The Secret World of Arrietty, having been written by none other than Hayao Miyazaki himself. The movie is an adaptation of the 1967 book of the same name by Joanne J. Robinson. Said book isn't the focus of this video, even though the differences between the two works might help me make a point or two. The story follows a young girl named Anna, as she is sent away to live with family relatives for the summer due to what seems to be health-related issues. It focuses specifically on Anna's quest for identity and belonging, most notably through the relationship between her and a strange girl named Marnie. Before we begin in earnest, I would want to say that I really like this movie. It's well animated, well directed, and for the most part well written. All in all, it's quite a beautiful story, and I would do you a disservice if I did not at least try to convince you to watch it before I spoil the hell out of it. Yet, I think I have to warn you beforehand that the last 10 minutes or so might rub you the wrong way. And if you've seen my content warning, you might be able to guess what kind of wrong way. It's highly possible you won't have any problem with it, as it might be the case that I've already given too much away and influenced negatively your viewing experience. If so, I'm sorry, but my hands were kind of tied on this one. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's a movie I really, really like, and there is plenty to love in it. But it is clumsy with how it handles some of its themes and metaphors. If you have absolutely no patience for this kind of things, that's cool and highly understandable, and you should probably skip the viewing part. I'm gonna summarize it anyway so that we are all on the same page. For the others, I'd suggest you give it a watch. So, quick plan of what's coming. As I've just said, I'll start with a summary of the movie, then we'll explore in more details what can be bothering about the ending, before opening up a bit on certain specific tropes related to the fantastic genre. As the most observant of viewers that you surely are, you might have noticed that this is only part 1 of 2. What's awaiting us in the second video, only time will tell. I also want to specify that I don't speak Japanese at all, so I'm gonna be using the English subtitles for my analysis. I am perfectly aware that subtle changes between the original dialogues and the subs can make a world of difference, which is why you should keep in mind that the text I'm talking about here is specifically the subbed version of the movie, and that whenever I'm referring to the writers, I am as much talking about the Ghibli studio staff as I am talking about the localization team. At the end of the day, my goal isn't to blame or praise any specific writer, so that shouldn't make a difference. If any of you is fluent in Japanese, or is familiar with any other translation of the movie and notice some difference, I'll be glad to read about this in the comment section. While the movie might seem rather slow-paced, the script is actually pretty tight, with very few scenes that could be considered filler. This means that there's not much I can just ignore, since most of it will be relevant in the discussion after a while. So this might be on the longer side of summaries. The movie opens with our protagonist, Anna, in a playground with the rest of her class. She sits apart from everyone else and thinks about how she doesn't fit in with the rest of them. We're shown that she's very good with a pencil, but doesn't seem either to realize it herself or to want anyone else to notice it. The scene ends with her having some kind of asthma attack after stating, The next scene opens with the doctor examining her. Here we're feeling a lot of exposition. We learn that 1. This kind of breathing problem must have appeared before, since she's got an inhaler. 2. Anna is a foster child and seems to have some internalized issues regarding the problem she might cause her caregiver, whom she referred to as an aunt. 3. Her family seems worried about her, mostly about how she seems to distance herself from everyone and doesn't show any exterior signs of emotion. The decision is taken to send her somewhere else to get better, and while Anna is told it's relating to helping her breathe better, it is clear that her mental state was a factor in the decision. We get to hear what kind of opinion Anna has of her aunt's concerns while she leaves Sapporo. We are then introduced to the setting of the rest of the story, a small coastal town, and to the people who took Anna in, relatives of her aunt. After another short scene where Anna's social anxieties are shown once more, she discovers an old house on the other side of the bay, which she feels compelled to get a closer look of. The house looks mostly abandoned, but while making her way back thanks to a local fisherman, she glimpses lights in the house for an instant. She's told jokingly that the so-called marsh house is haunted. That night, Anna dreams about seeing a young girl living in the marsh house. From that point on, Anna starts drawing the house by day and dreaming about it at night, until she's invited to go to a festival with some local girls her age. When one of them sees her make a wish for things to be normal, and remarks on her eye color, she reacts rather aggressively and flees the scene. While she's having some self-deprecating moment near the bay, we're shown a flashback of people discussing her adoption during what seems to be a funeral wake. Near the shore on that very night, Anna finds a boat with a lit candle in it, which she decides to use to cross the bay towards the marsh house. There, she meets a young girl who looks like the one in her dreams, and who apparently observed her from the window and seems keen on getting to know her. In fact, she's the one who left the boat for Anna to find. She asks for their encounter to remain a secret, and ships her back across the bay. On their next meeting, the two decide to learn more about each other. We learn that even though Anna seems to think that she's there due to her asthma, she also views it as a move on her aunt's part to get rid of her for a while. When the other girl, whose name we learn to be Marnie, asks her about life at her relatives, Anna has trouble remembering them. As she tries to, Marnie suddenly disappears. When she comes back, it seems that from her perspective, Anna is the one who suddenly vanished. Marnie then invites Anna to a party her parents are having at the marsh house, by disguising her as a flower seller. We get to see that Marnie's family is wealthy and apparently foreign. I think they're French? I mean, they smoke into each other's faces and offer red wine to an obvious minor, so... yeah, definitely French. During the party, Marnie leaves Anna to go dance with a boy named Kazuhiko. Anna gets some time outside to sober up, and when Marnie joins her, acts a bit jealous. Marnie invites her to dance with her, and they promise to see each other again and continue to keep their relationship a secret. At the end of the evening, Anna is found sleeping near the road by neighbors with only one shoe, which doesn't seem to raise any alarm. The next day, she finds her shoe by the bay, and trying to go to Marnie's house, finds it empty. She discusses her adoptive mother with her relatives, and gets sleepy while surrounded by old pictures of herself as a child. When waking up, she suddenly remembers Marnie's existence, after seeing a drawing she made of her. Anna wonders how she could have ever forgotten about her. She looks for her for at least several days, considering she took the time to change clothes, but the marsh house stays desperately empty. While drawing by the bayside, Anna meets a woman named Isako, who's painting the marsh house. Isako tells her that her drawings of Marnie look like someone she used to know, and also informs her that new people are moving into the marsh house. Coming closer to confirm this for herself, Anna gets invited in by a young girl who calls her Marnie. We learn that Sayaka, for that is her name, found a diary in her bedroom, which belonged to Marnie. While reading it, Anna makes the connection with some events she lived with Marnie. Sayaka is convinced that Anna must be Marnie, seeing as she often wanders around the house, and that this bedroom and the diary must have been hers. Anna tells her that this cannot be the case, since Marnie doesn't exist. She's only an imaginary girl she made up. Of course, this doesn't add up with the existence of Marnie's diary, so Sayaka decides to investigate the matter, especially since there are some missing pages. We cut to Anna going to sleep, and right after that to her near the bay, when Marnie finally shows up. Anna wonders where Marnie's been, and tries to invite her to her room, but Marnie declines, saying she cannot stray away from the marsh house. While wandering through the woods, they discuss their respective family. Anna is jealous of Marnie's still alive relatives, as both her parents and her grandmother died when she was very little. Marnie tells her that at least she knows the people who decided to take care of her without any blood ties must be kind-hearted, to which Anna responds that she found out that her foster parents are getting government subsidies to take care of her, a fact they chose to hide from her. Marnie tries to comfort her and says, and does that. They then discuss Marnie's family. We learn that her parents are actually mostly absent from her life, rarely coming home and leaving her with 3 domestics who treat her badly. She specifically tells of the old grain silo on the hill and how the maids threaten to shut her inside. It's Anna's turn to comfort Marnie, and she says, Anna decides to take Marnie to go and check the silo, to show her that it's not haunted. On their way there, Marnie calls her Kazuhiko, and walks ahead of her towards the silo. Anna crosses paths with Sayaka, who found the missing pages, and warns her about the oncoming storm, but Anna leaves, trying to catch up with Marnie. When she does, Anna finds her terrified in the silo, and she calls her Kazuhiko once more. As the two of them wait for the storm to calm down, Anna falls asleep and seems to dream about an old woman singing her the song that Marnie sang during the dance scene, and about Kazuhiko coming to rescue Marnie. She wakes up in the middle of the storm, alone in the silo. She tries to go home through the tempest, thinking that Marnie left her behind, and we're treating to more flashbacks relating to her abandonment issues. While reading the missing pages of the diary, Sayaka sees mentions of both Kazuhiko and the grain silo, and on a stroke of genius understands that Anna might be stuck in the storm. She and her brother find her in a fevered state in the middle of the woods. Again, it doesn't seem to raise that much alarm with anyone. In what is clearly framed as a dream, Anna meets Marnie one last time. Marnie tells her that she didn't mean to leave her behind, but that Anna wasn't there when it happened. She also tells her that she cannot stay here any longer, and asks for Anna's forgiveness, which she receives. After Anna's gotten better, she meets with Sayaka and doesn't seem to remember very well what happened at the silo. They discover that Isako, the painter Anna met earlier, knew Marnie from her own childhood. The pair decides to ask her about Marnie's life. We are told that Marnie left the marsh house for Sapporo and married Kazuhiko. The couple had a child before Kazuhiko died and left Marnie in a bad mental state. She had to send her daughter away while she recovered and never really managed to be close to her after that. The daughter died young with her companion, leaving Marnie to take care alone of her grandchild for a while, before she, herself, breathed her last. While Anna's aunt is coming to take her back home, she and Sayaka discuss how that whole Marnie affair brought them close and promise to keep in touch. After reuniting with her, Anna's foster mother finally tells her about the government subsidies, before showing her an old picture of the marsh house, which apparently belonged to Anna's grandmother. Obviously, the picture is Marnie's, and memories of her time with her grandmother finally come back to Anna. She recalls how the stories she lived this summer were told to her by none other than Marnie, her grandmother, a few years back. Anna seems finally at peace, and on the way to the train station, makes excuses for her shitty behavior of the festival night, says goodbye to the relevant people, and refers to her caregiver as a mother for the first time. Credits roll as she catches a glimpse of Marnie waving her goodbye from the window of the Marsh house. So, okay, I know this was a bit long, but there is a lot to unpack here. It's not really that much things happen in the movie, but more than it tries to tackle a lot of different themes at once, and so most scenes are relevant to at least one of them. This comes from the fact that it kept the main themes of the book, while also adding some of its own. We end up with a movie that deals with a lot of different issues, and as we'll see later, sends some really weird messages when those different focuses come clashing together. I think it's high time for us to talk about So, I don't know if you've noticed, but there is a way to read Anna and Marnie's relationship through a romantic lens. Yes, I know. Shocker, right? Well, not really, no. At this point it's not even subtext anymore, and without the last 15 minutes or so, it would be really hard to argue against that reading. For the few in the back who aren't convinced, I don't know how you can look at this or that and still see nothing but a platonic friendship. Of course, it could be argued that this only goes one way, since Anna is the one who blushes and confesses her feeling without any caveats. Still, for our purposes, I think it's enough to at least say that the movie depicts Anna as being romantically interested in Marnie. It's also interesting to note that this is an addition made by the movie. While most of the plot of the original book is preserved, a lot of the things the movie changed point in that direction. The best example is probably the party scene. The evening starts the same in both versions, but while book Anna seems to be just mildly frustrated that Marnie invited her to a party where she knows no one before leaving her on her own, movie Anna specifically asks about Kazuhiko and is very clearly jealous of him. It's also only in the movie that the scene ends with the both of them dancing together under the moonlight. It seems to me that exploring Anna's attraction toward girls is one of the main focus of the movie, mostly because it comes really early on in her characterization. Two scenes come to mind in that regard. The first is the opening scene. Try to pay attention to what the other girls are talking about during Anna's voiceover. The second one happens a bit later, when we see Anna again shied away from people her age. In both scenes, Anna's feeling of inadequacy are highlighted when a girl her age talks about boys. It's especially relevant in the first case, since this is our introduction to the character. We don't yet know about her being a foster child, having foreign ancestors, or suffering from panic attacks. We are just presented a girl with a boyish haircut who feels alienated from other girls her age as they are talking about boys. The coding could hardly be any clearer. This sets the tone for the rest of the movie, linking her anxieties and inadequacies with her queerness. The second scene drives the point home. It's not as explicit as the previous one since we don't get a monologue from Anna, but most people who caught it the first time will have the queer coding reinforced. Also interesting to note is the fact that this doesn't happen in the book, so those scenes, and specifically the choice of discussion topics of the other girls, are deliberate addition to the source material. There are two main points I really want you to take away from those scenes. The first one is how early on in the movie they take place. While we are not told or shown anything explicit yet, this is our first contact with the character and the story. I know I'm not the only one for whom this sets the stage for the rest of the movie, giving me a lens through which to see the story. When you open your movie on such a scene, it is imperative that you understand what you're doing. Sure, some, if not most, people might miss it, but those who cut it will carry it with them until they are explicitly told that this isn't a good way to look at the text. In this case, the point is driven home a few minutes later, and things only get more explicit as time goes on. The second point I want you to take away is how it relates to Anna's social issues. Again, since we don't know much about her yet, we can only attach these two things together. From the start of the movie, Anna being weird is actually Anna being queer. This, though, isn't supported as much by the rest of the movie, as the fact that the lesbian subtext basically becomes text at the halfway point is a good indicator that the movie isn't afraid to drop the more subtle coding. Still, I think it's important to remember that this queer coding is present at the start of the movie. So, now that we're clear on this, you might notice that there is a bit of a problem with this reading. Yeah, I do mean the fact that Anna is basically in love with a hallucinated version of her deceased grandmother. To be perfectly clear, I don't think it is impossible to write a good story where someone falls in love with the ghost of a long-dead relative. I even think it could be done while still presenting the relationship as positive. But one would need to go about it very deliberately and carefully. Here, it seems to be the result of a certain clumsiness on the part of the writing team. Marnie being Anna's grandmother is the ending of the book. The whole arc about her finding her roots and dealing with the trauma of losing her family was in fact the main point of the original story. The blooming romance between her and Marnie wasn't, though. Its addition to the story was a fine idea, hell, I'd even say it was a great one, and a good way to write a new story from the premise of the original. The problem is that the ending should have been changed to account for the shifted focus of the story. Okay, let's go a bit deeper into the problems caused by that ending. The most obvious one is the fact that the two girls are now related by blood. This basically makes us reconsider the romantic relationship we've been viewing so far, reframing the whole thing through the lens of Anna's abandonment issues. The flashbacks shows Marnie as a loving grandmother, probably the closest thing Anna can identify as a parental figure since she discovered the subsidies earned by her foster family. Changing her feeling toward Marnie from romantic love to a more familial one can easily be viewed as a big no homo written in the last 10 minutes of the movie. This is all the more aggravating given that, as I've shown before, the lesbian coding of our main character is present since the very beginning of the story, meaning that the last 10 minutes of the movie basically invalidates the totality of one's experience with it. This is more significant here than it would be with most headcanons, for two reasons. Firstly, because we're not just talking about some subtle nods towards the audience, but a very clear coding. Secondly, because of the long history of those kind of things happening specifically in regards to LGBTQIA+ representation. Hollywood is well known for its erasure of queer identities, but it's not like Japanese entertainment is a stranger to the practice. Another way of looking at it is if you do not allow the revelation of their blood ties to color the way you see Anna and Marnie's relationship. This makes sense to me. The romantic vibes are a bit too explicit for them to be completely erased by a few lines of dialogues on the flashback. But what do you end up with if you do that? Well, since Anna being a lesbian is explored through her meeting Marnie, and this ends up being based on something she half remembered from a parental authority figure, we kind of end up with her identity as a lesbian being intrinsically linked to confusion, a traumatic childhood, and incest. So, yikes. Please, don't tell me I have to go into more details to tell you why that's bad. Another big issue I have with the ending is what it implies about Anna's mental health. Remember that we've seen how Anna's insecurities and feeling of inadequacy have been linked to her queerness. Well, that would all be fine and good if that was the end of it. She's acting distant, sometimes even aggressive toward most people in the early parts of the movie. Opens up to Marnie first, then to Sayaka, and by the end of the story this is basically a problem that's been dealt with. Except, well, Marnie's not real, you know? Like, we are explicitly shown how Anna knew of the events she lived with Marnie beforehand, and she does seem to accept this as a fact. So the question around which it all revolves is, how lifelike were those scenes with Marnie from Anna's point of view? We, as an audience, were presented those moments as if they were really happening, but this might just be an artistic choice. In fact, at multiple points during the movie, there seems to be a very clear distinction made between Anna's time with Marnie and the rest of the events of the story. There seems to be some kind of dream logic going on here, where Anna forgets Marnie during the day and doesn't remember her family when she's with her. In fact, their last two encounters are implied to be dreams, the last one especially, as the scenes start right after we're shown Anna going to bed, and Marnie gets away with doing that. Anna also explicitly refers to Marnie as someone she created when she first meets Sayaka. According to the scenes, she could very well be perfectly aware that none of her moments with Marnie were really happening. They could just be either dreams or stories she consciously wrote in her head, albeit inspired by repressed memories of her grandmother. If that was the case, I wouldn't really have a problem with that, but there is no denying the existence of multiple scenes in which Anna genuinely believes she knows a blonde girl who lives in the Marsh house. Not only that, but on at least one occasion this belief ends up influencing real-life decisions that could have been dangerous for her. While their second to last encounter does begin in a way that suggests Anna is dreaming, the fact that she meets Sayaka while going to the silo shows that this is actually happening in real life. Going there with Marnie is the reason why she ends up stuck in the middle of a storm and eventually passes out on the ground with a fever. This means that Anna is dealing with actual life-threatening mental issues. The story and Anna herself mostly glosses over this fact, but that doesn't mean we should. While I will go into more depth on the complex ties between mental illness and the fantastic genre in the next part, I think it's important to discuss here how it impacts the reading of Anna as a queer character. We've been presented with someone with issues in regard to how she sees herself and her place in the world. Issues that have been linked to her queerness in the early scenes. So, showing her to be suffering from actual hallucinations cannot help but create a metaphorical link between queerness and mental illness. This is especially true since the girl with which she bonds and explores her feelings, both romantic and those linked to her insecurities, is the producer of said hallucinations. This is a very harmful connection to make, as queerness has a very long history of being diagnosed by the medical sphere as some kind of pathology that needs to be cured. Of course, the movie doesn't go there at all. In fact, it would even tend to downplay the mental illness itself and shy away from addressing Anna's hallucination altogether. Still, it's hard to ignore the fact that this is a connection that the movie does imply, consciously or not. Before moving forward, I want to discuss two more things regarding this whole Anna as a lesbian reading of the text. The first one relates to another queer reading of the movie, which does not invalidate the first one but adds another layer to it. Instead of just focusing on Anna's attractions toward girl, it is also possible to see this story as relating to their gender identity. From their boyish look to how they don't feel comfortable in traditionally female clothing. Through this lens, the fact that when reliving the story in the silo or in the dance scene, Anna ends up identifying with and envying Kazuhiko, a male character, is very relevant. So, there is merit to the idea of reading Anna as a trans, gender non-conforming or ex-gender character. I did not choose to go with that reading for this video, if only because it's not the one I made when first watching the movie, and because it was only recently brought to my attention. That being said, I think this is worth mentioning, and I'd be interested to learn more from people who've read the story this way. Let's just add that this reading suffers as well from the ending, at least as much as the previous one, if not more so. The other point I want to add is something I should have probably started this section or even this video with, as a sort of disclaimer. I'll still put it here so that way if people ignore it, I know they haven't been paying attention until the end. I do not care whether anything I've presented so far was put in the movie intentionally or not. If I had to guess, I'd say the lesbian reading was intended, and the problematic implications of the ending were just a side effect of the adaptation of a novel with a different focus. But I may as well be wrong. What matters to me is that those are things that can be read into the text, and quite easily at that. When writing a story, it's important to not only be cautious of what you purposefully say, but also of what kind of hidden meanings can transpire from your work. In this case, for example, if the relationship between Anna and Marnie was never meant to be read as romantic, a proofread of the script should have been able to detect the problem. No art exists in a vacuum, and so even things that might have a perfectly fine in-text justification can end up reinforcing harmful stereotypes, or at the very least, alienating some part of the audience. This is one of the many advantages of broadening your horizon as a writer. It makes it far easier to be able to understand where the very diverse people in your audience are coming from, and what they will most likely read in your work. In the case of a collaborative creation, let's say a movie for example, it also helps a lot to have a very diverse creative team. At the end of the day, I'm not here to blame anyone for what I would call mistakes. This video solely exists because those are things that troubled me when I first watched the movie, and some of my close friends had really similar experiences with it. All I'm trying to do here is share my own views on this movie, in hopes that it might help some of you understand a perspective that's not necessarily their own, or put words into something they may have felt, but not examined closely. As for those of you who were onto it all along, well, I guess I am just here to validate you, which is also fine by me. I want us now to leave this movie behind for a short while, because while I'm very much not done with it, the last problem of its ending is something that's not even remotely exclusive to it. So let's broaden this a bit and talk about Okay, quick disclaimer here. I spent the last decade or so pretending to study mathematics, which means I am neither a literary expert nor a psychiatrist. Not that you should take the words of anyone with those credentials as gospel either. This means that, in the unlikely occurrence in which I would appear to speak with any authority, you should take it as a side effect of my natural charisma and not as anything more. So, first, what do I really mean when I talk about fantastic stories? Well, fantastic, as a genre, is defined by the encounter between the mundane and the supernatural, and by the way the story chooses to frame said supernatural elements. The best way to understand it is in opposition to fantasy stories. In fantasy, the world itself is a place in which the supernatural just happens, as an accepted part of reality. The fantastic genre takes our world as a setting and adds magical elements to it. Well, not necessarily magic per se, but things that are not supposed to exist in real life. This is a good way to broadly separate the two, but we are still left in a weird place when it comes to stuff like urban fantasy, in which the real world was a fantasy setting all along, or magical realism, which also takes place in the real world with supernatural elements on top of it. The real defining factor of the fantastic genre lies in the ambiguity of the supernatural. Weird stuff does happen, or at least does seem to happen, but it's either not taken at face value by the characters themselves, or doubted by the audience through the use of an unreliable narration. Technically speaking, said ambiguity isn't meant to be resolved at any point during the story, and the reader, or the audience in general, is supposed to be left to ponder by the end of it. Of course, as with any classification, we are rapidly confronted with a lot of marginal cases. Where does urban fantasy end and magical realism begins? How much doubt should there be around the supernatural elements before we accept the story as fantastic? If a 500 novel suddenly gives us a rational explanation for its supernatural on the last page, does it somehow cease to be fantastic? As with any genre, fantasy and fantastic should not be considered as binaries, but rather as existing on a spectrum. For our purposes, let's just say that by fantastic, I mean any story set in what mostly resembles our world, with added elements which seems at least at first to be supernatural, and in which we are, directly or not, invited to reflect on the reality of said supernatural elements. So anything from the Blair Witch Project to What Remains of Edith Finch, Pan's Labyrinth, and obviously When Marnie Was There. And no, adding a maybe it was just all a dream at the end of your fantasy novel does not count in my eyes. This is actually a less restrictive definition of the genre, but I don't want to spend hours discussing the minute details of the different academic categorizations involved. As previously stated, the fantastic lives in the ambiguity, and an unreliable narration is an easy way to create said ambiguity. Historically, mental illness, implied or stated, was often used as a way to make the reader doubt the supernatural parts of the story. A well-known example would be the non-specific Great Old Ones-induced madness, often used by Lovecraft to frame his protagonists as not very trustworthy. One of the quintessential fantastic works also uses this trope. Le Horla, by Guy de Maupassant. There are multiple versions of the tale, but the one that's any good is presented in the form of a diary, in which our narrator describes his encounters with a strange, invisible being that haunts his nights. Anyone familiar with sleep paralysis can easily recognize certain patterns in the first few encounters, and the short story can then easily be read as someone being driven to madness by a phenomenon he cannot understand. Other readings of the text have also pointed out ties between Maupassant's love for the fantastic horror and his later degraded mental state, mainly due to the syphilis that ended up claiming his life. This should be taken with a grain of salt though, as Maupassant himself apparently claims that most of his stories were written before suffering from any mental conditions. That being said, I think it's rather interesting to see that mental illness was used by fantastic writers to frame their stories, but also by literary critics to explain some of the more out there elements of the genre. Early examples of fantastic literature often involve some horrific elements as well. It makes sense that the intrusion of the supernatural in a mundane setting, when portrayed with some grounding in real life, would incite fear in the hearts of the characters. To this day, horror and fantastic walks hand in hand, and there is a huge overlap between the two genres in cinema. In this regard, treating the ambiguity inherent to the story through the lens of mental illness isn't that much of a narrative problem. If, say, the Overlook Hotel in Shining isn't actually a cursed place, but we see the events as consequences of Jack's deteriorating mental health, it doesn't really change the tone of the movie. In both interpretations, his family isn't really in a good place by the end of it. Note that even though it fits narratively, in the sense that it doesn't create any tonal dissonance, the trope comes with some inherent psychophobia. Portraying mental illness in a way that can be interpreted by the characters as literal demonic possession, or implying that horrific imagery that's enough to fill a horror picture is the result of some character's condition, ends up painting a very awful picture of the mentally ill. Like, literally demonizing them in some instances. Lazy writing is and will always be the worst enemy of nuance. And in the case of the fantastic genre, the ambiguity surrounding the existence of the supernatural is often an easy way out of having to confront the question altogether. After all, by not explicitly giving a diagnosis to your character, you can always claim that you never actually wanted to imply anything about mental illness. You may have noticed that this does not really apply to the movie we've been discussing so far. Even I won't argue for a horror reading of When Marnie Was There. So, what happens when the two main interpretations of a fantastic story aren't tonally consistent? The supernatural elements aren't always there to provoke fear, and horrific tales are not the only ones that the fantastic can tackle. Romance, coming of age, or even comedies also occupy their fair share of the genre, and it seems rather obvious that in most cases, the possibilities that the characters may have hallucinated the entirety of the events would run counter to the rest of the story. Smart writers will generally circumvent this problem by either abandoning the ambiguity of the fantastic genre and embracing the supernatural elements, or by giving another rational explanation that doesn't involve a mental diagnosis of the protagonist. Sometimes the dissonance between the two interpretations can be harnessed and used to comment on the nature of storytelling itself, asking the audience to choose what they'd rather believe, which version of the story suits them the most. After all, even without the involvement of supernatural forces, a story is nothing more than a lie that we consciously decide to see as true. Very often, though, it seems that the problem is basically ignored. In the case that interests us today, Anna has a rather severe condition. As we've discussed in the previous part, she puts her physical health at risk chasing after what is framed by the end of the movie as nothing but a hallucination. Yet, it's never really addressed by the narrative, whereas her social awkwardness, self-deprecating tendencies, and anger management issues are not only introduced early on, but are mostly shown to be things of the past by the credit scene. In fact, Anna manages to overcome those problems through her relationship with Marnie. So, are we to conclude that her hallucinations are good for her? Don't get me wrong. A lot of people manage to live very fulfilling life with, and not just despite, these kinds of symptoms. But if this is the story they wanted to tell, I feel like outright ignoring the actual diagnosis isn't a very responsible way to go about it. All that ends up doing is either downplaying the role that mental illness plays in the narrative, or romanticizing it. While this might not be as harmful as demonizing mental illness, it's not really ideal either. Mental illness is a very touchy subject, and most stories that deal with it tend to lack the nuance necessary to do so responsibly. When Marnie Was There is far from being the worst example here, the trope being as common as it is in the fantastic genre. By simply choosing to ignore the problem in its ending, the movie avoids discussing the topic altogether, and thus doesn't state anything too harmful. Yet, by getting rid of the supernatural explanation, it cuts any possible escape route for its audience, and cannot really dodge every implications of its story. In a way, I feel like the book did a far better job handling Anna's condition, mostly due to it being the main focus of the narrative. It's not perfect by any means, but we spend more time with Anna after her last encounter with Marnie, and get a far clearer picture of how she views the whole thing. Before concluding the video, I want to add that my main problem with the way the movie handled mental illness is what we've discussed in the previous part in relation to Anna's queerness. Outside of those homophobic tropes, the problem isn't more egregious than anywhere else in the genre, but it was a good opportunity to address it more broadly. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video? That I really like this movie? Yeah, I can't blame you if you forgot. So, I spent nearly an hour venting about a movie I'm supposed to have enjoyed a fair bit. Well, if we're being honest, I only vented about the ending, but still. I probably wouldn't have done so if it left me totally indifferent, and as a rule I've decided to avoid talking about things I purely despise on this channel. Still, that leaves a question open. How do I reconcile my love for this film with, well, basically everything we've discussed so far? Well, that's what the second video will be for. I hope I'll see you there, but be warned, it's gonna get a little fanficky.
Just sit in my room after hours with the moon and think of who knows my name. Would you cry if I died? Would you